we're going to be talking about our newest product and how to install it on a 2016 Tacoma, 2016 Plus Tacoma Slimline Hybrid. This Stage 2 edition will only work with the Slimline and not any other manufacturer's products. So right off the bat, this is not going to be a fun install for some of you guys, and I apologize for that. But back when we first created these, going on 3 years ago, these little things were just twinkling in my eyes. So there's going to be some necessary modifications for you previous owners and anyone who doesn't have the newest version of our Slimline bumper that already has the holes pre-drilled and you know, with weld nuts in there. So with that said, these are the tools you're going to need. Before we start though, you need to complete your Slimline installation according to the instructions, because this Stage 2 builds off of that installation. So if you haven't already done so, go ahead and install your Slimline bumper. Make the cuts as if you normally would without considering the cuts for the Stage 2 yet. Once you're done with that and you like the way it sits and looks, take your bumper down again and we're going to meet right back here. Okay, so now that you've got your Slimline installed and taken back down again and you like the way it fits on your truck already, we're going to start with the installation for the older bumpers. This is going to be the guys that are going to have to do some drilling and maybe even tapping the way we suggest. So for you guys, try to set it up on a stand like this. You can easily clamp it down by the feet and it will stay upright. That'll make it the easiest to draw everything out, get it drilled. Or you can use some of the foam material from the box if you've still got that on the ground if you don't have this sort of situation. So go ahead and grab your Stage 2. Yours obviously will be powdered to match your bumper. What you want to do first is take this ⅛ bolt, probably from, we're going to be using the 2 holes here that used to connect out to the plastic to re-secure the plastic. And what we're going to do is just get a general alignment of this Stage 2 piece using this 1 bolt hole, because we're going to have to mark and drill these other holes that don't exist yet. So you're going to need an Allen key. I think this is a 5/16. I'm not certain, but you're going to need an Allen key that matches the ⅛ bolt head here. And what you want to do is tighten this down so that it can be left alone. And if you come check the front, you want this to be lined up so that it's flush with the face and in general alignment like that, because when we go, it's useful to have a clamp, because we're going to need to simulate as if this thing's been bolted in. All right? Now that you've got your wing positioned so that it's nice and flush and the lines are nice and even, you're going to take a scribe or a pen or a marker, whatever you've got, and we're going to simply trace out these bolt locations here, because this is going to mark exactly where we need to drill. Now for this one's a different situation here. This is still got a ⅛ bolt in it, but in our opinion, a single ⅛ bolt was not sufficient, so we upgraded that to a 3/8 bolt, which means that you have 2 options here. The first option that I recommend is to use a 5/16 drill bit to drill out this ⅛ nut that's already welded in. That will give you a straight, clean hole that you can then tap, because there will be enough material there. You can then tap that for a 3/8 bolt, so 3/8/16 tap, standard tap you can pick up at any hardware store. What that'll allow you to do is to make fine adjustments on the truck by keeping these bolts loose until you're ready to finally set it in place. Otherwise, the only way to do this is to use a 7/16 drill bit to drill all the way through it, so that you can then use your fingers to hold a nut or a wrench or a socket to hold a nut back here to tighten it down. The problem with that is that when the bumper is installed on the truck, you simply can't get back here with a nut. So you're going to have to basically tighten it up on the bumper and then install everything. So it's not impossible, but for the best fitment and for your sanity too, I would suggest just going ahead and tapping this out. You'll only have to do it twice, and then you'll be installed, so it's not that big of a deal. All right guys, now we're going to talk about the cuts that are going to have to be made to your plastic here. You can see this has already been done on this truck. However, I'm going to give you precise measurements from specific key points along the bumper cut line so that you can make your tape line as accurate as possible. So to begin with, I wanted to go over real quick the best fitting cut that you can make for the Slimline itself, and that's basically going to be about 3/4 of an inch from the edge. Let me see, check this out, cameraman. From the edge of your whatever this little plastic grill thing is to the edge of my cut is about 3/4 inch, and you're going to want to follow that the entire way. That will give you the best possible cut on this top lip line. Now, when we get to this specific spot, this is where your old cut that you made for the original Slimline, that's all going to get cut off. So, in order to make sure that we're getting our tape line set in the exact spot we need it to, we're going to need to make sure we keep a lip right under this edge, because this lip is what with this large piece of trim. Basically, you're going to take off your old trim that you had for the Slimline, and we supply a new piece of one-piece trim. So whenever you're putting this trim on, just keep in mind you're going to have a lip for it to stay on. So this angle, this crease, is going to be your guiding line that you lay that tape down. And it gets a little difficult to run your tape line around this curve without getting a little warbly, which is why we're going to give you measurements at precise points so you can try to make sure that your tape line is going to meet requirements. So from the get-go, we want to leave this lip here, and that lip, it needs to be at least 3/16, and I always recommend not cutting as much as you think you should, and then coming back and trimming later, because once you cut it off, you can't put it back on. So this lip is right at 3/16, but I would add another 1/16. Go ahead and make that 1/4 inch, so that if we need to, we can always trim some off later. Another point that you're going to want to try to match up to is I'm going to measure from this crease right here, the end of this crease right at that edge, to the edge of this point. And you're looking for 1 3/4, or roundabouts, real close. Now that we've got our original line kind of sorted out, we need to wrap it around this bumper. So the next measurement you're going to want to pay attention to is from the edge of your bumper here down to where the cut line needs to be is right at 7 1/4. But once again, oh sorry, you wanted to see that closer again? Right at 7 1/4. But once again, you're going to want to, I would leave another 1/8 inch on it, all around the entire way, because what could happen is you end up cutting a little too high up, or you didn't follow the line just right, you come up a little bit. Cutting it that 1/8 inch lower will allow you to correct that out and fix it, unless you just want a giant hole and not do it right. So 7 1/4 right here. Follow it up. Would you come around here, cameraman? Follow it up by measuring from the middle of the bolt to the edge of your cut. Is going to be 7/8 inches, 2 inches. See that? Okay, so we talked about our starting points and our ending points, but a real challenge is wrapping it around this corner so that the line stays straight and you don't accidentally rise up too far. So I'm going to give you a couple more measurements based off some body lines that you'll be able to use to make sure your tape is correct. So from this edge of the fog light housing, we're going to use our tape measure, run it all the way up the top until we get to this crease in the bumper, and you're going to want to measure out about 9 inches at this point for your tape line to rest on. Okay, so for our final measurement, we're going to make an artificial line here, but we're going to do it by connecting 2 points on the truck that everyone will have standard. So using our tape, we're going to connect this point right here at the edge, right? And we're going to run it around until the top of the tape is right on that same crease that we just measured from just a moment ago. Now we've got a standard line to measure from to grab these other 2 additional points so we can make sure our cut's the best it can be. So from your tape line, and my measurements are going to come from the top of the tape line because I don't know what width you're going to be using. So the line we want to focus on is the point from here to here, right? And we have 2 creases right here that we can measure at. So that's the ones I'm going to give you. Right now you're going to want the first crease. This one measured 9 inches if you remember. You want this crease from the top of the tape line to measure right at 8 3/8. Coming over to this line here from the top of the tape line once again, 7 7/8. So to recap, the measurements that you're going to want to use from the beginning to end are from this point to the corner is 1 7/8. No, I'm sorry, 1 3/4. We want a 1/4 inch lip from the top of the tape to this point. You want it right at 9 inches. From the top of the tape at the next crease. Whoop. 8 1/2. And what I'm doing is I'm adding an 1/8 inch for you so that we can make sure not to cut too much. 8 1/2 on that point. We're gonna do right at 8 at the second crease. We're not gonna use the tape line for this because we can just measure straight from the crease down to the spot. We're at 7 1/8. Let's go ahead and make that 7 1/4. So come down to 7 1/4, and then from the bolt, from the center of the bolt to the edge, make that 2 inches. Once you've got all those points marked with a Sharpie, that's when you're going to want to take your tape Alright? You're going to run your tape line on the bottom half of your bumper from point A all the way to the end. Cut with a Dremel just like you did with the Slimline. So once you finish the cut on both sides using these measurements, we're going to get the bumper and reinstall everything for the final time. So hopefully you've made the most beautiful cuts that you could ever imagine in your life. You follow the instruction as well as you can, and to play it safe, you added a 1/16 or an 1/8 inch of measurement just to make sure you didn't cut too little off. So when you're all done with that, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this big old long piece. I think it's 90 something inches long, 92. We're going to take that old piece of trim off from the original Slimline. We're going to replace it with a single piece all the way across. And to do that, we just slip it on just like normal. All the way around. When we get to this point, we want to try to mold it in. This has got little metal pieces in it, so once you get a turn made, oh, don't break your bumper off. Once you get a turn made, you should be able to maintain that hole. And then all the way down. And another good thing that this edge trim does, it not only does it clean up the cut, but it also allows for a little bit of fudging. Because like me, when I was making these, I actually cut this side up just a little bit too much. But with the power of this edge trim, I can just install just a small amount of it instead of all the way up, right? So I can pull this down a little bit to make it appear as though I'm an excellent excellent bumper cutter when I am in fact not. So you may be left with a little bit. Just take some what the hell are they called? Tin shears? Yes. Or even some strong scissors to cut that off. You can see we don't want to go into the molding here. We basically made the cut through the molding, made the cut through the plastic, and we're going to stop the edge trim right at the edge of this molding. Okay, so you may have noticed that you've still got a giant piece of black plastic fender liner hanging down here. So in order to get rid of that, what we're going to do is, as soon as I find my tape measure, god dang it.
Tape measure?
Tape measure! Found it. We're going to make a straight cut. And you're aiming for that the bottom of the second little vent here on the passenger side. And essentially about an inch down from your main cut here. You can, whenever I did this, you can try to come up a little taller, but for my purposes, I really wanted it to cover as much as I can because you got the fog light in here too. So even if you have your fender liner hanging down a little bit lower than your cut, that's all right. The stage 2 is going to cover up anyway, and it's going to look great. So from the bottom of my cut, well, let's just go from the bolt here. It's right at 3.25 inches that I started making the cut, and then I tried to make it a straight line and came to the second vent on the passenger side. Let's go check out the driver's side. Okay, so on this driver's side, God bless Toyota, they didn't do it the same way. Of course they didn't. So we're still going to do the same sort of 3 3/4 cut here at the bottom, but there's nothing else to really go by. The only thing that you can kind of identify is this one. Can you see in here, cameraman? Follow. They got this one clip. You want to make sure you keep that clip, otherwise you're going to have nothing to hold it. So whenever you make this fender liner cut for the driver's side, you're just basically going to have to come out as straight as you can, just below that push pin. So now your plastic bumper cover should look very similar to this. We want the edge trim pushed all the way up. Like I said, we can adjust it later once all of the parts are on. And once you've got this finished, we're going to go back to our Slimline. Hopefully you've decided that the best route would be to drill and tap for this 1/4 hole to a 3/8 bolt if you have the old style version. If not, we're going to have to go ahead and install these on the bumper and install the whole thing together with all the wings and everything, because you just simply will not be able to get to this bolt to tighten it up after it's installed. So that's why we really suggest tapping for the 3/8 bolt, so that you can install the Slimline first and then install the stage 2 second, and you'll be able to adjust everything perfectly. As it stands, you're going to have to hope that your cuts were exactly right for the installation that you've done to your bumper. Okay, so for our intents and purposes for the installation video, we're going to act like we've done the drill and tap method that we suggest. So when I install my bumper, it actually, if you'll come look over here, the new style version bumpers that we've come up with to complement the stage 2 already have the holes drilled and pre-tapped for the 3/8 nuts everywhere here. So we're going to use this example to further this along. So after you've already drilled and tapped your nuts and bolts, and then put this back on the truck here. And with our new style bumper, we actually have the ability for left to right adjustment up to 1 inch. So this is where you're going to want to take that chance to square your center your bumper up just right on your truck. I'll hold it here with some nuts. So now we've got our left and right, correct? I always suggest when tightening up the Slimline, I always suggest tightening the bottom bolts up first, so that you can make sure the bumper has risen the correct amount, and you're not trying to squeeze this metal down to accommodate for this one. You can see that I'm missing my safety devices here that Toyota put in, but you'll want to reinstall those little blocks that actually have the welded nut in there, so that you can use your M12. As it stands, I'm gonna have to use just an M10 bolt and nut that I've got. So by now we should have our Slimline bumper reinstalled, squared up, lined up. You can go ahead and reinstall your winch cables, whatever else you had going on there, and we should be ready to bolt on the side clearance pieces. So we'll do that now. So to get them in and around the bolts here, it's a tight squeeze, but it can be done. You're going to want to basically enter it at this angle here, so that you can slip it past those bolts in the back. and get it ready to line up. So, as you can see, the bolt holes obviously line up well because we designed it that way. If you drilled them yourself, they should also line up pretty well because you should have, if you'll remember, whoop, you should have, come up over here. Whenever you went to drill your holes, we wanted to line this up as flush as possible. And essentially that's what we're going to be doing again as we bolt it on. This is going to be our template to make sure that these are as flush as we can get them. And you can see as we do that, everything starts to mount up nicely. Because if you put it at this angle, it's not going to work. If you put it, see, there's some variation in the holes there, and we do that so to allow you to get the best fit you can. But ideally, you want it to be flush here, as flush as you can get it across the top, with the wing right along the edge. Once you've found this flush setting here, just go ahead and tighten down your bolts to hold it in place and add the others. Now, there could arise a situation where, despite the fact that you've had the holes drilled and whatnot, as you tighten the bolts down, you could have the situation where the gap between the stage 2 and the Slimline may not be as straight as possible, because we're going back over the course of 4 years of selling these bumpers. There's been some changes, some variations, some different bend angles and stuff. So how much you tighten down the top and bottom bolts could change how it actually fits. To remedy that, we've actually sent you some shims, some stainless steel shims, and some double-sided tape. So the idea here is, if you follow me, let's say, for instance, and here's a good for instance right here. Let's say we've got stage 2 installed, but if you look down this line, you can see how it kind of closes off down at the bottom. Ideally, we'd want this to be the same distance all the way through. So to correct that, in your bolt pack, you should have received about 12 of these stainless steel washers. They're about 1 millimeter thick each. And the idea here is that depending on where the gap closes off, if you have that problem, this is just a precaution, you're going to want to stick, because we included these and some double stick tape style stuff, you're going to want to stick that washer on the hole that needs just a little more space. And we've essentially, at this point, shimmed it 1 millimeter at a time. If you need to, you can use another piece of that double-sided stick stuff and put another washer. But at that point, you probably wouldn't need that much. So that's why we're using them only as 1 millimeter thick, because a small variation here ends up to be a large variation at the tip. So I've got my stage 2 installed preliminarily. And right now I'm working on putting the other 2 3/8 bolts in. Still gonna need some wiggle room. I suggest really only trying to get the wing set in place once you've got the other bolts started. That way you know that it'll be able to tighten up. Alright, so we've got all 3 of our 3/8 bolts started, and lastly there's a spot for a 1/4 bolt, and I just recommend go ahead and put that in there. It can't hurt to have that little bit of additional strength there. So one last time, we're gonna line our stage 2 up so that our gap is almost the same and that we've got flushness across the face. Once we've got that specific location, that's when we start tightening up our bolts. And at this point, you should be able to see how well the wing is lining up. I haven't tightened the top bolts yet, so you'll find that whenever you tighten the top bolts, this will actually draw up a little bit more too. So you can't really tell how it's going to look, the final fitment version, until you tighten all your bolts. So be sure to do that before you try to make any other adjustments or changes. So now that you've gotten that proper position of your stage 2 and you've gotten the bolts all tightened down, take a look at everything. Make sure that your cut lines are working out the way you expect them to. For instance, right here, it looks like my fault. I cut up a little high, which is why I was trying to tell you guys, add that 1/8 inch. Okay? Because if you don't, you're gonna have to do like I do. We're gonna have to cheat a little bit. What that means is just to bring this edge trim down, just so you don't see that gap distance. So it's kind of some consolation that even if you can't cut it well, this edge trim allows you to kind of cover up your boo-boos.